Well, when you look at the United States, looking forward, what policy constellation would you recommend to the President and the legislature to meet these structural challenges that you've identified?
Well, I think the problem, the hard problem that we've got now is, if you set aside whether or not anybody in Washington is focused on it or not for the moment, the hard problem is that we have to pick a sensible time path for deficits, a time path for fiscal stabilization that's not so fast that it takes the wind out of the sails of the economy immediately before any reasonable, estimate of its ability to adapt. And then bring it down fast enough so that we're fiscally in detail, and we've started to generate growth and, bring the debt to GDP ratio down. And within that context, which has its constraints built into it, we've really got to focus on growth engines and especially employment engines. And my own view, but when I've been writing about this, partly based on what I was trying to think about in the book, I really wanted to start the conversations. I don't think there's easy answers, but my own view is that the tradable sector has to become an employment engine again. We just can't sustain the path we were on before. It was enabled, the absorption of everybody, almost all 27 million in the non-tradable sector, was enabled by excess consumption, asset bubble, debt-fueled asset bubble, very large growth in healthcare, might or might not continue. We're aging, but the government doesn't want to spend more money.
It's now on budget to a larger degree, so the uninsured costs will start to become a part of our sovereign debt consideration.
Exactly. And pretty large growth in government. So, how do we do that? Well, then I think you start the conversation and you try as best you can to include the entities that have some relevant knowledge. It's not just economists and policymakers, it's the business community. Where are we close to the margin in terms of competitiveness, where we can generate employment for various different categories of people in our income and education sort of distribution? Where are the skills deficits? We know that there are skill shortages, so some jobs are going unfilled. Can we, with a focus on employability, fix the defects in our educational system? And then there are broader things. I think the tax system, could be overhauled. We don't really want to tax employment or investment if we want the engine to run.
You want to tax bad things, not good things.
Yeah, sure. I'm in favor of some form of value-added or consumption tax. Not as the whole tax system, but a big chunk of it. We'll have to do some redistribution, as I know there's objections to that in terms of regressiveness. But I think that's the kind of direction we should go, making sure it sort of makes sense from the point of view of not biasing incentives in favor of foreign activity as opposed to domestic activity. Let it be an even playing field, getting rid of the housing subsidies, getting rid of the dysfunctional tax expenditures. I'm not a tax expert, but that's pretty clearly on it.
That's on the menu,
And then to go back to one thing you said, I think, a sensible energy policy, which, not only invests in technology, but, anticipates a world in which these folks grow, the relative price of natural resources, including energy, rises. We get started on that so it doesn't happen to us suddenly and in shocks, and creates the incentives over time for an economy that partly has to rebuild itself with it's in some sense our version of the new growth model, and we can do that at a pace that makes some sense and allows our economy to structurally adjust to it. So none of us knows how much of the problem in terms of employment and to some extent the rising income inequality this will solve. But I think almost everybody agree if we pick sensible paths, it'll help in terms of the speed of recovery and the quality in terms of incomes and employment opportunities of the result, and then we may have some income distribution issues left over to deal with.